Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. It's quite a challenge to start this panel and keep this engagement as high as the previous panelist did, the previous keynote speaker. So I hope your morning coffee was strong enough and prepared you to discuss rather unpleasant topic of extreme policies and hate speech. And things that still continue to fuel conflict and violence in this region and beyond. In 2022, Prime Minister Pashinyan, during his opening speech at the 4th Global Forum Against the Crime of Genocide, publicly called on the leaders of the South Caucasus, and I quote, to cooperate with each other to eliminate hate speech at the official level. Yet, despite this call and despite all our efforts reporting to the respective international organizations about the state-level propaganda against Armenians in Azerbaijan, the world witnessed the ethnic cleansing of Armenians from their birthplace in September 2023. So today we will hear from our distinguished panelists who have been at the forefront of advocating for the rights of the Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians. And our first speaker is Joel Veldkamp, who is the director of the Public Advocacy for Christian Solidarity International, CSI. Since July 2023, he has represented CSI at the Human Rights Council in Geneva, where he has delivered several interventions on behalf of the Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh. He holds a master's in Middle East Studies from the University of Chicago and a PhD in history from the Geneva Graduate Institute. His dissertation, interestingly, concerned the politics of Armenians and Christians in Aleppo under the French occupation. Very interesting. So, Joel, the first question goes to you. What are the priorities of the Christian Solidarity International when it comes to advocating for the rights of the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh? Please. If I can, I mean, you can go there or just say it from here, however you wish.
I'm more comfortable standing, I guess. Thank you, Naira, for the question, and thank you very much to the Center for Truth and Justice for inviting me to speak here. It's a great honor, and I've been so inspired by the last 2 days of proceedings. I'm not a lawyer, I have no law experience, and so it's been very educational for me as well, and really a pleasure to participate in such a well-organized conference with so many distinguished colleagues. So CSI, Christian Solidarity International, is not a legal organization. We're a human rights advocacy and humanitarian aid organization, and we help persecuted Christians and persecuted religious minorities all around the world. And when it comes to Nagorno-Karabakh, it is a very difficult advocacy environment, that is for sure. And so we prioritize putting the human rights of Artsakh Armenians back on the table at the international level, and specifically the right of Artsakh Armenians to self-determination in their homeland. The people of Artsakh are a people, and they have the right to determine their own political future in their homeland. The fact that their homeland is currently occupied by Azerbaijan doesn't change that. This right needs to be defended, loudly and publicly, wherever we can. And I think it's instructive that the Baku regime also seems to think that it is important to deny or undermine the legitimacy of Artsakh at every turn, even today, almost a year after the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh. Just a few examples. In the Paris Olympics this summer, during the Parade of Nations, when the Armenian team came on, a French television commentator made the remark in his commentary, last year Azerbaijan conquered Nagorno-Karabakh. And this simple, neutral statement of fact provoked an official protest from Azerbaijan to the International Olympic Committee. And shamefully, the International Olympic Committee responded with a letter to the Azerbaijani government in which they apologized for this reporter. Again, a reporter for a French television station who has nothing to do with the International Olympic Committee. The IOC told the Azerbaijani government, quote, "Clear indications have been delivered to avoid any future references using similar terms." In July, CSI hosted a side event at the UN Human Rights Council about the right of Armenians to return to Nagorno-Karabakh. Before the event began, I was personally advised by UN staff that we should tell our speakers to avoid using the word Artsakh. Otherwise, there might be problems for us. And I personally believe that this was genuinely friendly advice from the UN staff, because they knew the problems that Azerbaijan might cause for us. So my boss, Dr. John Eibner, promptly rewrote his opening remarks so that the word Artsakh was mentioned in the very first paragraph. I think this hypersensitivity on the part of the genocider points us towards something very important. As long as the memory of what happened last September persists, then the genocide is not complete. As long as people are talking about the rights of Artsakh Armenians, the possibility remains that those rights might be restored, as Professor Cotton just said in his remarks before. The Baku regime wants this issue to go away, and we need to keep it alive. One venue where CSI has been trying to do this is the UN Human Rights Council. And I don't claim that this is a particularly important venue for advocacy, but it's a venue that we have access to as an NGO with UN consultative status, and I think that what we've learned from our work there might be instructive. Since the ethnic cleansing last year, we have made 4 oral statements on the floor of the UN Human Rights Council, condemning the ethnic cleansing and calling for the right of return of Artsakh Armenians to be upheld. On 2 of these occasions, the Azerbaijani delegation exercised its right of reply and attacked CSI on the floor of the UN Human Rights Council. In one of their replies, the Azerbaijani delegate accused me of, and I quote, attempting to distort the situation regarding the voluntary departure of the Armenian population from the Karabakh region. Of course, the statement is patently false and ridiculously offensive, and I personally consider that a win. As often as we can, we should be making Azerbaijan defend itself in public. Its surrogates should be seen to be saying ridiculous things as often as possible. As some of you know, CSI also launched a campaign this year to have Azerbaijan banned from the Paris Olympics, just as Belarus and Russia were banned over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We dubbed it the #BanAzerbaijan campaign. And we knew from the outset that this was not a realistic goal. They weren't actually going to be banned from the Olympics. That wasn't the point. The goal, again, was to keep the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh in the public eye. In July, the UN Human Rights Council had a special panel on human rights in sports, which was attended by the president of the International Olympic Committee. And at that panel, we were able to make a statement on the floor calling for the IOC to ban Azerbaijan. As a result, several high-profile media outlets in the UK wrote about our campaign, and by extension, wrote about the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh. The combination of a high-profile setting, the UN Human Rights Council, with a high-profile media event, the Olympics, allowed us to put this issue back in front of the international public once again. But probably the most important thing that we are doing at CSI to uphold the right of Artsakh Armenians to self-determination is to support their legitimate representatives. Contrary to popular belief, the Republic of Artsakh did not cease to exist on January 1st this year. I see this idea repeated often in press coverage of the conflict, even from friendly sources. But it's not true. Yes, in the week between the Azerbaijani attack on Nagorno-Karabakh on September 19 and the beginning of the forced exodus on September 25, when communications with the outside world were mostly down and we didn't know if we were about to see a general massacre, the president of Artsakh, Sandal Shahramanyan, signed a decree dissolving the Republic of Artsakh effective January 1st, 2024. But after the Artsakh Armenians had been evacuated to safety, the president revoked the decree and acknowledged that the constitution of the Republic of Artsakh does not give him the power to dissolve the Republic of Artsakh in the first place. It was a legally void decree made under threat of massacre. Legally, the Republic of Artsakh still exists. Again, the fact that Azerbaijan is occupying it does not change that. There is still a parliament elected by the people of Artsakh. And this parliament, the Artsakh National Assembly, has appointed a committee called the Committee for the Defense of the Fundamental Rights of the People of Artsakh. It is headed by Vartan Oskanyan, who is Armenia's longest-serving foreign minister. And its members also include Mr. Yerevan Stepanyan, who spoke here yesterday and who has represented his people's cause so eloquently on the world stage. And this committee is working tirelessly to represent the cause of the people of Artsakh at the international level. And they focus on 3 key issues: the right of return, the protection of Armenian heritage in Nagorno-Karabakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, and freedom for the Armenian hostages being held by Azerbaijan. In July, CSI had the privilege to host 3 members of this committee at a side event that we organized at the UN Human Rights Council. We were also able to organize meetings for them in Geneva with different international organizations, with different diplomatic missions, with the Swiss Foreign Ministry, with Swiss National Radio, and with different Swiss politicians. Vartan Özkanyan himself, the former foreign minister, made a statement on our behalf on the floor of the UN Human Rights Council. In all of these fora, the committee members made the case for the return of the people of Artsakh to their homeland under international protection, as part of a durable, long-term peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And again, they were appointed to do this by the legitimate elected representatives of the people of Artsakh. And now I have to say something that is perhaps a bit uncomfortable, but we've heard it echoed here a few times now in the last few days. I had the privilege to sit in on some of these meetings in Geneva between the members of the committee and different diplomatic missions and international organizations. And what I saw again and again is that the person across the table listened patiently and expressed their sympathy and promised to do what they could. But then at the end, they gingerly said something like, okay, we're hearing this from you, and it makes sense to us. But we are not hearing this from the government of Armenia. And if the Armenian government is not supporting these claims, what do you want us to do about it? Yesterday, Joanna Frivet shared that she had a very similar experience meeting with different diplomatic missions in The Hague. And it's a very good question. If we are serious about advocating for human rights, about finding a pathway to justice in the post-conflict setting, then this is one of the biggest problems we face as advocates. Right now, a peace treaty is being negotiated between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and the voices of the people who have suffered the most in this conflict are not being represented. The Committee for the Defense of the Fundamental Rights of the People of Artsakh is open and willing to work with anyone who can contribute to the cause. And I would encourage everyone here to support their work and amplify their voice so that they cannot be so easily ignored. As I said, the people who perpetrated the ethnic cleansing last September want this issue to go away. We have to do everything we can to keep it alive. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Joel. I think the questions you raised do not have easy answers, but we'll definitely have time to discuss. And now I want to give the floor to my colleague, a person who I see almost every day as we work together, Arpi Harutyunyan, who is the Justice and Human Rights Portfolios Manager at the Democracy Development Foundation. Her professional journey includes roles at the Ministry of Justice as well as the Government of Armenia, where she served as Deputy Head of the Office of the Representative of Armenia on International Legal Matters. She is a very promising young professional, but has already managed to supervise 2 fact-finding missions investigating war crimes and international humanitarian law violations in Nagorno-Karabakh. Please, Arpi.
Thank you for the floor, and thank you for having me here. And first of all, I want to thank CFTJ for organizing, for creating this platform where we can come together and discuss so many important issues. So thank you. But turning back to our today's topic, which is hate speech and extreme policies by Azerbaijan, I just have to start with the Safarov case, right? I'm sure most of you know the Safarov case by heart, but just in case somebody doesn't, I will be brief in explaining. Ramil Safarov was an Azerbaijani army lieutenant who violently murdered an Armenian army lieutenant in his sleep with an axe in Hungary when they were both attending NATO training program. And Safarov was sentenced by Hungarian courts to life imprisonment. However, he served a couple of years from his sentence in Hungary and then was transferred to Azerbaijan to serve the remaining of his sentence in Azerbaijan. However, as soon as he landed on Azerbaijani soil, right the moment, he was pardoned by the President Aliyev himself. Not just pardoned, he was glorified, he was awarded, he was just treated as a national hero. And we When you let this sink in for a second, when you realize the signal, the message this sends to the young generation of Azerbaijanis, it's just green light for more violence, right? And more violence occurred almost right after. In 2016, we saw beheadings of Armenian soldiers during the four-day war. In 2020, so many heinous, just horrific hate crimes happened by Azerbaijanis against Armenians. Tortures of civilians and POWs, beheadings of Armenian civilians and POWs, extrajudicial killings, just many, many hate crimes, and all of those were just documented, were videotaped, photographed, and disseminated all over the internet by the Azerbaijani servicemen themselves. And this wasn't the end. It continued in 2022 when Azerbaijan attacked Armenia proper. Again, the bodies of Armenian servicewomen were violently mutilated. There were, again, extrajudicial killings, beheadings, and it goes on and on. In 2023 as well, during the forced deportation, we saw so much violence, we saw humiliating treatment, we saw hate crimes committed on and on again. And now this is the result of years-long extreme hate speech insinuated in the population of Azerbaijan. And hate speech is not something new, right? It's a tactic of war. It has been used worldwide by all countries. There is hate speech in Armenia as well. But the difference is whether the volumes, first of all, and whether it's state-sponsored or not. In Armenia, it's not state-sponsored. However, in Azerbaijan, it is. And it's not just us saying that. In 2022, CERD, the UN Committee on Elimination for Racial Discrimination, clearly stated that not only there is hate speech alive in Azerbaijan, but it's being disseminated by the public officials themselves. And they also noted that there is lack of accountability, lack of investigations into hate crimes, which just fuels the fire more. It's not just the UN. The European Commission on against racism and intolerance has been for years warning us against Azerbaijani hate speech, and they even went as far as saying that there is an entire generation of Azerbaijanis that has now grown up listening to all of this hate speech. And it starts from schools, it starts from kindergartens, it's all over the media in Azerbaijan. ICJ went on to order Azerbaijan to refrain from hate speech and discrimination against Armenians, including coming from public officials and public institutions. And this does have grounds. Just let me give you a couple of examples. In 2020, during the war and after the war, the hate speech just insinuated, and President Aliyev called Armenians animals. They just called Armenians, they said they're chasing Armenians like dogs out of Nagorno-Karabakh. This is just one example. He called us rats, he called us devils, he called us cancerous tumors, you name it, he has said it. And it's not just words. Remember the trophy park? If you don't remember the trophy park, this was a park that was opened right after the war in 2020 in Baku. And it was just wax figures of Armenian soldiers in very dehumanizing, humiliating poses. And President Aliyev himself participated in the opening of this trophy park and just gave another hateful speech. So this is why we say it's state-sponsored. We also say that it's state-sponsored because it starts in kindergartens and schools. For example, you can see a lot of videos on the internet where very young school children in Azerbaijan, they pledge their loyalty to their country, but at the same time they vow to hate the enemy in the face of Armenians. And it's not one, two examples, it's a lot of examples. But this is not just about words, it's about actions. Our team at DDF, and with a wonderful team of international and local organizations, and please bear with me while I name them all because they have all done such a great job. Freedom House, IPHR, Truth Hounds, Protection of Rights Without Borders, Law Development and Protection Foundation, and Helsinki Citizens Assembly Banazor, and our team at Democracy Development Foundation. We have conducted a fact-finding mission into the war crimes and crimes against humanity and just gross violation of human rights in Nagorno-Karabakh that happened after the 2020 war and during the blockade and after the blockade, so during the attack and during the forced deportation. And in short, we found that there was an ethnic cleansing of the Armenian population from Nagorno-Karabakh and forced deportation, forced displacement of Armenians. But within this fact-finding mission, we conducted hundreds of interviews with victims and witnesses of displaced persons from Nagorno-Karabakh. And it was heartbreaking to see how all of these hate crimes and hate speech had translated into their consciousness and how they were affected from these hate crimes. And many of them just told us stories about how they were affected by all of this. For example, there was a woman that showed us a video. She said this video was being disseminated by Azerbaijani media during the blockade. And in this video, Azerbaijani media just compared Armenians in the blockade to a wild cat that was being kept in a cage, and the message was how you can tame a wild cat in the stage. You can also tame Armenians that are being kept in the blockade. This is just one example, but we have had so many people just speaking about how the hate speech and hate crimes affected them. For example, we had a number of people that were taken captive on the 19th, on the 20th of September 2023, and they were just taken for a couple of days to some of other towns, Afdam, be it Afdam, be it Hadrut, and they were later returned after a couple of days to Armenia. And these people told us still horrifying stories. For example, they said for the cameras, they were shown good treatment, but after the cameras were off, everything was much darker. They told us about, again, violence. They told us about ill treatment, beatings, or at least to the least extent, mockery and just humiliating treatment by Azerbaijanis. And all of the Armenians, or almost all of the Armenians that we talked to, who had some kind of encounter with Azerbaijanis, they talked about the hostile treatment that they got from them. So what I'm just trying to say here, and I see that I have only 1 minute left, what I'm trying to say here is that hate speech translates into actions of hate. It translates into hate crimes. And as advocates for human rights, it is our job to not let this go on. It is our job to document all these violations and raise awareness and make sure that the international community knows at least what is going on. And it's our job to fight for the rights and restoration of the rights of the victims from Nagorno-Karabakh. Thank you.
Thank you, Arpi. And you mentioned Safarov, like Gurgen Markaryan's case. It's worth also mentioning Hrant Dink's assassination in Istanbul. So it wasn't just one case, unfortunately. I now want to give the floor to Steve Swerdlow, who is a human rights lawyer and associate professor at the University of Southern California, where he founded the Political Prisoners Project. There will be a question on this, Steve, I want to warn you. An expert on the former Soviet region, he was senior researcher for Human Rights Watch, heading the organization's Central Asia office in Kyrgyzstan, covering Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, and also conducted research missions in Azerbaijan. That's also quite interesting. Earlier, Swerdlow litigated alien tort statute cases in US courts as a plaintiff's attorney at, okay, I'm struggling, but Leif, Cabrasar, Heyman, and Bernstein in San Francisco, and was the human rights monitor for the Union of Council for Soviet Jews to Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. The floor is yours, Steve.
Thank you. To add to the list of amazing things that happened at CFTJ's conferences, I have to say, I did not expect I would learn from David Katin the background of Tajikistan's ratification of the ICC. So thank you for that. Amazing things happen here. I just want to, I want to say that I'm not as cool as Philippe Rochelle. I'm not a third-time participant, but I am a proud second-time participant of this conference. And for as long as you'll have me, CFTJ, I hope to be contributing to your efforts for justice for years to come. And I want to simply say before I start, Judge, CFTJ staff, Lala, Abgaryan, others I've met, I want to say this: you are all profiles in courage. Now, while Naira has mentioned that, I do hope we get to a more practical discussion of freeing Armenians in captivity using the global Magnitsky statute. I know some of my colleagues will talk about that, and the political prisoner definition. I want to make a few remarks about some work that I've been conducting with my wonderful students at USC to add to some of Arpi's great comments now about the nature of hate speech, and to contribute and to support to what I believe is Armenia's landmark case on hate speech. And so I will try to contribute. And I also want to thank my students who are watching this: Alex Harutyunyan, Mane Barikian, Avery Palentan, who have contributed to this work. I think that one of the defining features of this more recent phase of the conflict has been hate speech. Beyond the devastating violence that we've seen, those innovations that are so cruel, it's the hate speech, it's the Armenophobia. And of course, I know to some of you in this room, these are very, not just graphic and sensitive, but incredibly personal. And I think the case of Anush Apetyan really sums it up. This incident, now we're sitting here 2 years to the day of these events when Azerbaijani forces captured her and other Armenian soldiers. And again, we have to speak this truth. We have to say this out loud. A graphic imagery that is nothing short of horrific. Apetyan's legs cut off, a finger severed, placed in her mouth, her eye poked out, replaced with a stone, while Azerbaijani soldiers appear to be celebrating this and then widely disseminating it on Telegram, which I think is such a significant aspect of this. These are war crimes, crimes against humanity. So putting a little bit more meat on the bone, so to speak, of the hate speech discussion we've been having, we have two treaty bodies that give us context on how to define it. We have both the ICCPR and we have the CERD. And Article 22 provides that states have an obligation to prohibit advocacy of national, racial, or religious hatred that constitutes incitement. And then you have CERD, which is broader. As some have pointed out, we've been talking about also the intent, which is always the lawyer's problem in many of these crimes. And here we don't need intent. Mere dissemination of ideas based on racial superiority is enough. And so I think both standards help us here and are important, but the third definition is broader in nature. And again, dissemination does not require specific intent. And in thinking about what constitutes hate speech, we look at this test, the Rabat Plan of Action from 2012, which encourages us to look at the social and political context of the statement made, the identity of the speaker, including their position and their status, of course, President Aliyev and on down, the intent, the content and form, the extent of the statement's dissemination, and that, I think, again, significant that Telegram in particular has made the dissemination of hate speech in this context, in this day and age, comprehensive, total, complete. And then the likelihood of harm, including imminence of violence, which I think Arpi just said. Now, we tried to categorize hate speech into three areas. The first was dehumanizing and degrading language used by Aliyev and other senior government officials. The second was the erasure of Armenian culture, history, and territory. We've been talking about the terminology of Western Azerbaijan, but one thing that I've paid a lot of attention to over the years is that the theory of historical Albania or ancient Albania, which really dates back to the 1960s when Azerbaijani academics were popularizing this notion that Armenian cultural sites, cemeteries, churches did not belong to Armenia but belonged to another kingdom, a Christian one called ancient Albania. And then finally, probably the most chilling category of hate speech is this idea that Armenians must integrate or perish, integrate into Azerbaijan, relinquish their identity, or simply die. So Aliyev on January 12th, just weeks after the ICJ's order, says, we hadn't known the scale of vandalism and barbarism. This completely subverted the whole ideological concept of the Armenians of being a civilized people. Then we see an example here, a fourth grade textbook, showing how Armenians should be killed with an axe. This is category 1. Again, September 13th, 2022, this terrible date, I know, for some of you in this room, where following the fighting, Aliyev himself posts a video on Telegram. Learn to think with your head. We are here. Didn't go anywhere. Don't piss us off. Behave yourselves. If you behave well, then you can live in peace. If you commit any provocation against us or make a statement again, we will smash your heads. This is a head of state. Regardless of anyone, no one will help you. And then we have, again, I apologize for the terrible nature of this, but I think it's important that we discuss it. Now, as to category 2, this is another speech, of course, December 22. Armenia now is our historical land, confirmed by many historical documents, maps, our history. And here's an interesting example of projecting one's crimes onto their victim to reflect what you've done. I mean, we've seen this sort of Freudian behavior in other contexts, but he says they expelled Armenia, expelled all ethnicities from there in every possible way, killed some, threatened others, burned down their livelihoods, expelled other nationalities, established a state for themselves in someone else's land. Armenia was never present in this region. Present-day Armenia is our land. This is, as has been pointed out here over the last 2 days, so dangerous. And leads to action. Now, there's a particularly pernicious person. He's big on Twitter. He worked his way up through the propagandizing, the circulation, widespread circulation of hate speech into a parliament position, Tural Ganjali, some of you probably familiar with this, who makes these claims very, very often. And he says, we must overcome the mountains, peaceful and just return to Western Azerbaijan. Again, a use of human rights in a quite cynical way. Now, category 3, again, we have an image here, Arpi mentioned this earlier, of the trophy park. Now, I think it's so notable that after the ICJ's intervention, we do see that pressure works. That's always a lesson I like to relay to my students. Pressure works. President Aliyev was forced to take down some portions of those terribly racist installations. And this is an image of him walking through a display of helmets of Armenian soldiers. And I think I've given you a lot of examples, but the conclusion here is that these do amount to hate speech under international law, both I think under the CERD and under the ICCPR, and they're premised on the notion that Armenians as a race are inferior. And I think the category 2, the history, the cultural language, the erasure of territory, it may not per se be hate speech, but it contributes to an overall narrative of Armenians as inferior, and therefore it's very important to us. Obviously, these are blatant violations. I think Armenia wins on the merits. We hope to see this case proceed over the next year. And then finally, I'd end on this piece of argument, that here we really have an opportunity to explain to everyone what Armenophobia is. And this is exactly what it is. I think it really deserves a deep reflection and a lot of discussion and a use of that term more widely. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve. And I think that, I'm not an expert in that field, but I think the current arrests of peace activists in Azerbaijan is another way of expressing hate speech, propagating hate speech against Armenians. But now we open the floor for questions, and I hope there are no questions because I have one. Okay. All right, let me ask you this. I mean, Joel, you provoked us by saying that, this uncomfortable thing about the government not pursuing the cases, but first, I mean, we do have cases in the international courts, but let's speak a little bit about this nuance. Pursuing justice can negatively impact the political peace process in various ways, such as delaying the process, hardening positions, and undermining trust between the conflicting sides. So what would your advice be to human rights defenders in such circumstances, when we are in between politics and human rights, peace process and human rights?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, Naira. It's one that I approach with humility because the people of Armenia have suffered so much in so many wars, and we all do want peace in this region very badly. My perspective, as an observer who's been working on this issue for a few years now, is that the current peace process is being shepherded by very powerful nations that have a big interest in this peace treaty coming about. So I don't think the threat from human rights defenders to this peace process is very big. I think even the European Union, the United States, Azerbaijan itself are going to make it happen, and they're not going to allow our words to blow up the whole thing unless that's actually the goal, for Azerbaijan to attack Armenia again, in which case it doesn't really matter what we say. But I think we need to look at the sort of peace that's evolving here. The fact that Azerbaijan has attacked Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia, by my count, 4 times in the past 4 years. No, sorry, in the last 8 years, actually, if we go back to the 2016 war, and has never faced any real consequences for this. They haven't faced any consequences for the ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh. On the contrary, they've been rewarded. And we see that they're continuing to make demands in response to this. Every time they get something new, they make another demand, right? They demanded tavush. They got tavush. Now they're demanding that Armenia change its constitution, and they're demanding a corridor across Syunik. So I think we're headed towards an imposed peace, a peace under duress, which is not really a peace at all. I think unless, as has been repeated so many times during this conference, unless there is justice for the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, the peace is not even going to last. It might be a temporary reprieve, but it's going to be peace under threat, and it's a peace that's going to break down as soon as the geopolitical winds change again, which they will. We've all learned that we live in very unstable times. So I would say human rights defenders should frame their claims to the people of Nagorno-Karabakh as saying, if you want a real peace, if you want a durable peace, address the injustices that have happened here, and don't let these atrocities go unanswered.
Thank you, Joel. There is a question for Steve. Did this policy start from the Soviet period? Any insight on that? Yes.
Can you hear me? Well, in fact, we're doing research, and again, my students who are up late watching this from Los Angeles and myself, we're engaged in actually, and again, with a little inspiration, a lot of inspiration from CFTJ, we're looking very closely at, in a way, to some extent, challenging the narrative, and this is, as we've discussed, some of us, that it's sort of a byproduct of the Cold War histories of nationality policy in the Soviet Union. But my students and I are looking closely at Armenophobia as a phenomenon that well predates 1988. In fact, goes, at least in this context, we're talking about Soviet Azerbaijan, goes back to 1920, looking at representation in positions of government, looking at acts of violence, show trials during the Soviet period, which appeared to be very slanted. So there's actually a lot of evidence to this. There's a whole history, I think, of Armenophobia and of ethnic discrimination against Armenians during the Soviet period that hasn't been written that much on for a variety of reasons. So I do think it both lends credence and more legal force to the ongoing case at the ICJ, but it's also important to tell this history. And so I do believe that. And I was saying probably what was so powerful were these ideas of historical Albania that were encouraged in the 1960s and 70s and popularized, and then became policies of governing when Elchi Bey becomes the first president of Azerbaijan.
Thank you. There is a question, and you're free to choose if you want to answer. How exactly a political leader like Aliyev can be punished for his hate speech? What are the current mechanisms and tools?
Well, I mean, I think that we're going to have a discussion here as the day goes on about the tools at our disposal. And while it may seem pie in the sky to talk about a global Magnitsky designation for our sitting head of state, I mean, we've seen that, as my esteemed colleagues here who are much more expert on the ICC have talked about. We've seen these changes. We've seen these evolutions of law around Bashir and Charles Taylor. So why can't we talk about this? In terms of, I think that one of the best tools we have in the U.S. foreign policy toolkit is the Global Magnitsky Act. And I do think that it's really important that the U.S. government step in now and, as Joel has said so eloquently, really recognize these severe and egregious ongoing crimes. We did see the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom recommend that Azerbaijan be called a country of particular concern this year for the first time, which I think is very significant because that is also a piece of legislation that automatically, if not waived, would result in sanctions against the government of Azerbaijan. And of course, we go back years talking about Section 907. There are a lot of things going on in this conversation. All of them need to be used, but I think it's the symbolic importance and the practical importance of denying visas, freezing bank accounts, and speaking truth to power. So I do think that President Aliyev himself takes notice. I said the trophy park changed after the ICJ stepped in, so we need to utilize all the tools that we have at our disposal.
The other question is about, I mean, some people notice that Azerbaijan's hate speech seems dulled right now, so it went down a little bit. What is this due to? Any ideas? Is it because we in legal community worked well and made him?
I mean, there is no precise answer to this, but I think and I hope that it's the political pressure. But I also think that it's politics, and they're waiting for COP29, they're waiting for elections in the US. So there is no one precise answer, but that's my best guess. Thank you.
I agree. Yeah, we may have a different world after November. Someone wants us to talk about 907, please. Yeah.
I think it's well past time that the United States, we can't, so much has happened since the last time we met as a group. Samantha Power, in her capacity at the helm of USAID and writing such an important book on genocide, evading questions, or at least looking incredibly uncomfortable when confronted with those facts on the ground. When we saw this, of course, we've seen important steps by the Biden administration at the beginning of the term, the recognition of the genocide. But I expect more. I expect a lot now. And you don't have to be Armenian to want this out of your government. I also would like to say that I think that in Los Angeles alone, I'm interested, because we have so many experts here on jurisdiction, I mean, the connection of the deaths and the war crimes committed against Artsakis. We're talking about 1 degree of separation to so many American citizens, including some American citizens that were in the Republic of Artsakh. There are so many reasons for the U.S. government now to step in a way that I think are, again, well past time. But yes, arming Azerbaijan is completely reprehensible and should end. But there should be other consequences, as I said, I think.
Thank you. Sure. Yeah.
I'm just asking the folks to explain what Section 907 is.
Judge, maybe you will do that.
All right, in the 1996, legislation was passed in the United States, and it had to do, at the time, with Azerbaijan blockading Armenia. Because Azerbaijan, for those of you who don't know, there was an energy blockade that started in 1992, went on for at least 2 years. Actually, we're still under blockade. Armenia and Azerbaijan have no communication. The energy blockade made Armenia freeze and starve. They call it the dark years. Legislation was passed in Congress that said if one country blocks the transportation of humanitarian aid to another country, then they should be punished or sanctioned. I know people are going to tell me I'm butchering this, but that's the idea. However, there's an exit clause where State Department can put that aside. For several years, 907 was in power. And then life got comfortable, the Armenians stopped paying attention, Azerbaijan picked up speed, and 907 has consistently been set aside up until last year. All right, so 907 is a mechanism to actually sanction Azerbaijan because the United States does give money to Azerbaijan in different forms. Does it give it weapons? No. But when you're supplementing the economy of a country in other ways, you're assisting them, obviously. So that's why I wanted to explain there is, it's called the Humanitarian Aid Corridor Act. That's Section 907. But just to add, there are, Magnitsky sanctions have been delivered, not just in the United States, but in Australia and France and other countries. So the equivalent of Magnitsky. Financial, economic sanctions do work. That's why I wanted to talk about this.
Sure, John.
Thank you very much, Judge, for explaining Section 907. To be honest, I couldn't remember the details, so I'm glad you stepped in. But I'd like to share a little bit of the background about Section 907 that I'm aware of, which is that this provision that allows the president to waive this ban on aid to Azerbaijan was passed in 2002 in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. So I see it as very much a part of the U.S. reorienting itself in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks to find friends in the Islamic world and to fight terrorism. And that's kind of the beginning of a warm relationship between the U.S. and Azerbaijan that continues until today. And the senator who introduced the legislation to allow this waiver is Senator Sam Brownback from Kansas, who is a very conservative Republican and a very passionate Christian as well, and for many years portrayed himself as a great defender of persecuted Christians in the world. And it's very sad that he was the one to push this legislation, but that kind of shows where the U.S. was heading and is still heading. But after the siege began in December 2022, we were able to organize a press conference in Washington, D.C. with our friends from the Armenian National Committee in Defense of Christians and several other groups. And former Senator Brownback attended, and he stood in front of the microphone and he said, "I was wrong. We should not have had this legislation, and the president needs to stop sending aid to Azerbaijan now." Obviously, the president did not. So I guess 2 points. The U.S. is in this for geopolitical interests, but there is a latent support in the Christian community in the U.S., the non-Armenian Christian community in the U.S. that can and should be activated.
Thank you. Arpi, I think we're all curious to hear a little bit more about the most recent summary of the report released by local organizations jointly with the Freedom House, which was titled, "Why Are There No Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh?" And could you tell us about the major findings and why might Armenians be unable or hesitant to return to their homeland?
Thank you for the question. Well, there is no short answer to this question, but I'll try to be as brief as possible about the findings of this fact-finding report. Well, I should start by saying that we conducted over 330 interviews with victims and witnesses of displaced people from Nagorno-Karabakh, and we corroborated this evidence that we gathered from them with open source intelligence, satellite imagery, etc., etc. So a combination of sources. And we analyzed all of these findings together, and we found, of course, so many gross violations of human rights. Right to life, right to be free from torture and ill treatment, right to liberty and security, just so many, I don't want to name all of them. But the most important finding, I think, was when we analyzed all of this together, we realized that you cannot view these violations separately. You have to view them as part of a chain. And then you start to notice certain patterns. And what I mean by this is, for example, we saw patterns of actions by Azerbaijan that were aimed at keeping the Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh in constant fear, constant terror. And this was done by various means. For example, just opening fire, shooting against peaceful civilians, and I mean this before the blockade, during the blockade, so I don't mean during active military activities. They would open fire on people working in the fields doing agricultural work. They would open fire on a person working on the gas pipeline, etc., etc., and they sometimes caused deaths. And this would just keep the people in constant fear, and they would openly use a microphone and say, do not work in the fields, do not work on the tractor, do not do this, do not do that, and just kept Armenians in constant fear that if they do agricultural work, which was sometimes their main source of income, they might die. And this was, again, exacerbated with the hate speech from President Aliyev, the constant information terror on social media, posting violent videos of Armenians being tortured, killed, beheaded. So just different types of actions to keep Armenians in constant fear. And also, the blockade, which was just full of human rights violations, just keeping Armenians in conditions that were not viable for surviving there, and the attack. So all of these actions together, when you put all of them together, you realize that there is a certain pattern and a certain strategy. And what this strategy is, after a thorough analysis and after combining this evidence with the rhetoric, with lived experiences from Nagorno-Karabakh population, we had enough evidence to support the claim that the displacement of Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh was forceful, was intentional, and that it served one main strategy, the aim of which was to ethnically cleanse Nagorno-Karabakh from its ethnic Armenian population and cultural presence. That's the short answer to why there are no Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. And for your next question, why Armenians may be hesitant to return, this was a question that was asked to every single person, every single displaced person in our interviews. Would you ever consider returning to Nagorno-Karabakh? And while the answers were somewhat different, they were also mostly identical. And many people said that, of course, they would love to return to their homes. It's their homeland, it's their home. But we had a woman say, how can I live in a society that hates me so badly? How can I live in a society that violently killed my father during the 2020 war, tortured my brother who was a POW? How can I live in this society? And we had so many similar answers. And the main thing that was common in all of the answers was that they would love to return, but if there was real international presence and real international guarantees. Thank you.
Thank you, Arpi. And Steve, I promised that there will be a question about another victim group called prisoners. And honestly, I personally get lost when I speak to Azerbaijani experts. And we use the terms like POWs, hostages, political prisoners, Armenian detainees, Armenians in captivity. Could you please advise us on how we should sort of make the... Yeah.
Well, maybe the name of my project, the Political Prisoner Project, gives it away, what I'm about to say. But I believe, like a lot of the topics that we've been discussing over the past few days, we need to mainstream the suffering, the human rights abuses that we're seeing here for the larger human rights community. I'm glad to be on the NGO panel, and even though I'm at a university, I'm still in spirit back where I was. I think the mainstream human rights community has at times not lived up to its responsibility to really see these human rights abuses for what they are. And one of the reasons I think the term political prisoner, which is not in a treaty, but I would argue is customary international law and appears in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe from 2012, I believe that definition helps us. It says a person deprived of his or her personal liberty is to be regarded as a political prisoner. Again, note the distinction with amnesty, prisoners, not a prisoner of conscience, slightly different, but if the detention has been imposed in violation of one of the fundamental guarantees set out in the European Convention of Human Rights and its protocols, in particular, freedom of thought, conscience, religion, freedom of expression, information, freedom of assembly, association. That's very important, those exercising your fundamental rights. Secondly, if the detention has been imposed for purely political reasons without connection to any offense, and I think that's obviously the case here in terms of, we've talked about 23 political prisoners, 8 in the leadership of the Republic of Artsakh and 15 others. There are more distinctions. C, for political motives, the length of the detention and its conditions are clearly out of proportion to the offense of the person found guilty. We're seeing remarkably lengthy sentences from 6 years to many more years. Azerbaijan is known for that, and I'm very familiar with that from its repression against its own citizens in the human rights community. If for political motives he or she is detained in a discriminatory manner. So again, we have what we've been talking about, hate speech and ethnic discrimination. And if the detention is the result of proceedings which were clearly unfair and appear to be connected with political motives, so all the due process violations, the lack of counsel, the lack of contact with loved ones, the torture, the ill treatment in detention. I was speaking with someone here who was in a basement in Baku in detention and told me about what he experienced. I think it meets the definition of a political prisoner, and I believe it amplifies and brings us maybe beyond the discussion of prisoners of war. And I know that the term hostages is also used. I don't think any of them are mutually exclusive, but I do think that we need to see more advocacy, and of course CFTJ is out front on this, filing petitions with the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention and utilizing the Committee Against Torture. So all that should continue, but it should be amplified, broadened, and widened.
If there are no questions, I have another question to Arpi, again, back to the fact-finding report, which was met with strong denial and opposition from the Azerbaijani side. What strategies have you employed to counter this opposition?
For the question, I think the best strategy to counter this opposition is through our methodology, because I think that we have a foolproof methodology, because it meets all the international standards, it has a very good sampling strategy, it follows the reasonable ground standard of proof, which is what is required from NGO documentations. But most importantly, it's the verification process that we did. So every information that we received was verified using different sources. For example, if we got information about an incident from an interview, we corroborated this evidence with other interviews about the same incident. We used open source intelligence, we used media sources, we used satellite imagery, just to verify this information. And every single piece of information that is written down in the report is verified by different sources. So I think this makes it easy for us to say that all the information, all the evidence that we put in the report is verified and correct. Thank you.
Couldn't be a better strategy, frankly speaking, very professional approach. If there are no questions, then I would invite you for final comments, if you wish to leave our audience with. Joel, maybe you'll go first.
First of all, if you haven't read the summary of this new report, Why Are There No Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh, please do that. It's an excellent, excellent report, and we're so grateful to have this resource. And when Arpi was talking about what people said when they were asked, do we want to go back to Nagorno-Karabakh? And they said, yes, of course, but we don't feel safe, in part because of the hate speech that we've heard about here. When Assistant Secretary of State James O'Brien was in Yerevan a few months ago, he did an interview with CivilNet, I believe, where the interviewer asked him straight up, do you support the right of return? And he said, sure. He couldn't say no, right? He'd give a very non-enthusiastic yes. And then the conversation moved on, and the interviewer started asking about economic integration in the region. And he said, yeah, we think economic integration can happen after a peace treaty, and that might help resolve the other thing you were talking about, because with economic integration, people can live where they want. So we're not talking about a right of return with the right to self-determination, with human rights. We're talking about like a Schengen-style zone where Armenians can freely choose to go and live in Nagorno-Karabakh, where they'll be totally safe, of course, under the rule of a dictatorship that has made demonizing them into part of its national ideology. That's what the US appears to have in mind. And so we really, really need to press right of return with self-determination. And as I said, I think the best way to do that is to support the people of our stuff have already exercised their right of self-determination in choosing their own leaders, and we should follow their lead.
To add earlier to what I was saying about sanctions, I do think that the question was about President Aliyev, but I think it's much more realistic, and I hope in the very near future we'll see senior military commanders, the people that were responsible for giving the order to the brigades to commit the terrible war crimes and abuses against Gayane, Anush, and so many other terrible incidents. They should be brought to justice now. They should be sanctioned now. I find it a tragic contradiction between the Biden administration's commitment and often powerful proclamations of wanting to fight authoritarianism and support democracy, that we still have this policy. So I think I wanted to say that, and I do believe also a presidential advisor. So in addition, some of the close political support that Aliyev has received, I think, Joel, you talked about this quote, this term voluntary departure, which I heard repeated numerous times by presidential advisor Hikmet Hajiev. I think that is, again, it's actionable language. I think it's part of this hate speech conversation that we need to see made into concrete action and policy. And again, I want to thank especially the victims in this room who are going to Geneva, The Hague, Washington later this week to speak truth to power. You're my heroes, and we'll continue to support you in your efforts.
I think I'll just direct my last words here to all of those people, all of you who are working on these cases. Please do not give up. I know there is a lot of politics in all of this, in the decisions, and you often get asked, why do you do this? It's all politics. Why waste your time in vain? But of course it might be politics, and politics does play a great role, but politics also shifts. And I want us to be ready when politics shifts to our favor. I want us to have everything ready for international tribunals and even political bodies to pursue accountability. So let's do what we do. Thank you.
And just to reiterate what Arpi is saying, I'm not from legal community, and it was so inspiring to listen to these speeches when you quote this article, that article, and try to justify this and that. But then outside of this conference hall is a completely different world. And let me finish this panel by saying that we should keep calm amidst these geopolitical storms and mind our professional business. So thank you very much to all of you for the great job that you do these days. Thank you. Thank you.